Welcome to Monk's Temple. I'd like you to try something with me right now. Just for a moment, become aware of your hands. Where are they? What are they doing? Feel their temperature, their weight, the subtle pulsing of life within them. Now, without moving your hands at all, notice if there's any impulse to adjust them. Any subtle urge to change their position, to scratch an itch, to do something with them. Just observe that impulse. Don't act on it. Don't judge it. Simply notice that it's there. What you're noticing right now is a craving. A tiny one, barely perceptible, but a craving nonetheless. And in this small observation, you've just done something remarkable. You've created a gap between the arising of a desire and your habitual response to it. This is what we're going to explore together. Not the obvious cravings you already know about, the ones that keep you up at night. We'll begin with the tiny ones. The micro cravings that flicker through your mind hundreds of times each day. The urge to check your phone. The impulse to interrupt someone. The pull toward the refrigerator when you're not hungry. The quiet hope that this meditation will be over soon. These tiny cravings are like background static. They're always there, shaping your experience, nudging you in 1,000 directions. And because they're so small, you never stop to ask, what am I actually craving? The Buddha devoted his entire teaching to this question. He saw that craving is the engine of suffering. Not just the big sufferings, but the daily low-grade suffering we accept as normal. The restlessness. The dissatisfaction. The sense that something is always missing. And here's what he discovered: what you're craving is almost never what you think you're craving. The object of your desire is just the bait. The real craving is located somewhere else entirely. Let me tell you a story. Years ago, I knew a woman named Patricia. She was in her late 40s, successful, financially comfortable, with a family who loved her. By any measure, she had a good life. But Patricia was struggling. She felt empty. Hollow. Like she was going through the motions without actually being alive. She came to see me because she'd started having panic attacks. The doctors found nothing physically wrong. So here she was, desperate for answers. "Tell me about your day," I said. "The small things." She described waking up, checking her phone immediately, scrolling before she even got out of bed. Breakfast, rushed, standing in the kitchen. Work, 8 hours of meetings and emails. Home, dinner, television, sleep. Then doing it all over again. And in all of that, I asked, "When do you feel most alive?" She thought for a long moment. "Never," she said quietly. "I don't think I've felt alive in years." Here was a woman who had everything, who did everything right. And she was dying inside. Dying from 1,000 tiny deaths each day. Dying from never being present, never being satisfied, never being okay with what was. Her cravings were not the problem. They were symptoms. Attempts to fill a hole that couldn't be filled by any of the things she was reaching for. The Buddha would have recognized Patricia immediately. He would have seen that she was caught in what he called the cycle of becoming, the endless process of reaching for one thing after another, hoping the next thing would finally be enough. If you're finding value in this teaching, please take a moment to subscribe to Monk's Temple. Hit the subscribe button below, and together we'll continue exploring the landscape of the mind. Now, let me tell you about something that happened at a meditation retreat. There was a man there, about 60, who had been meditating for decades. One evening, someone asked how he'd gotten started. He laughed. "I started because I was angry all the time," he said. "At my wife, at my kids, at my boss, at strangers. I was a walking ball of rage. So I came to meditation hoping to get rid of the anger." "And did you?" someone asked. "No," he said. "The anger is still there. But something changed. I stopped being angry about being angry. I stopped adding a second layer of suffering on top of the first. Now when anger comes, I feel it in my body. I watch it arise, and I watch it pass away. And somehow, in that watching, it loses its power. It becomes a visitor instead of a resident. This is the first great lesson. You don't have to get rid of craving. You don't have to fight it. You just have to see it clearly. To understand where it's actually located. To notice that it comes and goes on its own, and that you don't have to follow it. But to see this, you need a practice. You need a way of training your attention to observe your own mind in action. And that's where the breath comes in. Think of your breath as an anchor. Not because you're trying to hold on to it, but because it keeps you steady while the currents of craving flow around you. When you focus on the breath, you're not trying to stop your thoughts or desires. You're simply giving your mind a stable place to rest so you can watch everything else arise and pass away without getting swept along. The breath is always there, always available. It doesn't trigger new cravings. It's simply a quiet companion, reminding you that beneath all the wanting, there is something that doesn't need to want. Something that can simply be. Let's go deeper into this practice of breath awareness. Not because the breath is special, but because it's always here. It's like a friend who never leaves, who never judges, who simply accompanies you through every moment of your life. When you sit with your breath, something interesting happens. You begin to notice that your mind doesn't want to stay with the breath. It wants to wander. It wants to plan, remember, fantasize, worry. It wants to do anything except rest quietly with this simple rhythm of inhalation and exhalation. And why is that? Because the mind is addicted to craving. It's addicted to the motion of reaching. The breath is still, neutral, unsatisfying to a mind that craves stimulation. So the moment you try to rest with the breath, the mind rebels. It pulls you toward memories, toward future plans, toward anything that offers the familiar thrill of wanting. This is not a problem. This is the practice. Every time you notice your mind has wandered, every time you gently bring it back to the breath, you're strengthening a new mental muscle. You're teaching your mind that it doesn't have to follow every impulse. That it can choose where to place its attention. Let me tell you about a man named Daniel. Daniel was a software engineer, brilliant at his work, but his mind never stopped. He would lie awake at night, his brain churning through code, through problems, through conversations from the day. He came to meditation hoping to find some peace, some quiet, some relief from the constant mental noise. The first few times he sat, he almost gave up. His mind was like a monkey on caffeine, swinging from branch to branch, never still for more than a second. He felt like a failure. Like he was the only person who couldn't do this simple thing called watching the breath. I told him something that changed his practice. I said, "Daniel, every time you notice your mind has wandered, that's not a failure. That's a moment of awakening. In that instant of noticing, you've woken up from the dream of thought. Celebrate that moment. Don't criticize yourself for wandering. Praise yourself for waking up. He looked at me like I'd just given him a gift. And in a way, I had. I'd given him permission to stop fighting with his mind and start befriending it. Within a few months, Daniel's relationship with his mind had transformed. He still had thoughts, lots of them. But they no longer controlled him. He could watch them arise and pass away like clouds in a vast sky. And in the spaces between thoughts, he discovered something he'd never known was there, a quiet awareness, peaceful and clear, that had been present all along, hidden behind the noise. This is what the breath practice offers. Not the elimination of thought, but the discovery of the awareness that contains thought. Not the end of craving, but the realization that you are not your cravings. You are the one who notices them. Now, let me share another story. This one is about a woman named Claire, a therapist who worked with trauma survivors. She came to meditation not for herself, but because she felt burned out from holding so much pain for so many years. She was compassionate, skilled, dedicated, and completely exhausted. In our first conversation, she said something that struck me. "I spend all day helping people feel their feelings," she said. "But I don't think I've felt my own feelings in years. I'm too busy managing everyone else's." I suggested she try something simple. When she sat with her breath, I asked her to notice not just the breath itself, but the space around the breath. The pauses between inhalation and exhalation. The stillness that contains the whole process. She tried this for a few weeks and came back transformed. "I found something," she said. "In those pauses, in that stillness, I found myself. Not the self that's a therapist, a mother, a wife. Just myself. The one who's been there all along, waiting for me to notice." Claire had discovered what the Buddha called the unconditioned, the dimension of awareness that doesn't depend on any conditions, that isn't created by thought or feeling, that simply is. Always. Beneath everything. This discovery changed her work. She still helped people feel their feelings, but she no longer got lost in them. She could hold their pain without being consumed by it. She had found a place of refuge within herself, and from that place, she could offer genuine refuge to others. The breath is the gateway to this discovery. Not because the breath itself is special, but because it's always available. It's always now. It's always neutral. It's the perfect anchor for a mind that wants to learn the art of presence. Think of it this way. Imagine you're standing on the shore of a lake, watching the waves. The waves are your thoughts, your feelings, your cravings. They rise and fall, crash and dissolve. You can watch them without being pulled in. You can observe their patterns, their rhythms, their endless dance. The shore is your breath awareness. It's stable. It's safe. It doesn't move with the waves. From this steady place, you can watch the entire drama of your mind without being swept away. This is the beginning of freedom. Not the end of waves, but the discovery of the shore. Not the elimination of craving, but the realization that you are not your cravings. You are the one who watches them come and go. And here's the most remarkable thing. As you rest on the shore, watching the waves, something begins to shift. The waves become less compelling. They lose their power to pull you in. You see them for what they are, temporary, impersonal, not yours. They arise from conditions, and when those conditions change, they pass away. You don't have to do anything to them. You don't have to fight them or suppress them. You just have to see them clearly. This is what the Buddha meant when he said that seeing clearly is the end of suffering. Not knowing about suffering, not understanding it intellectually, but seeing it directly in your own experience. Watching it arise and pass away. Realizing that it doesn't belong to you. That you are free of it even while it's happening. The breath is your tool for this seeing. It's your anchor, your shore, your steady companion on the journey home to yourself. Now we arrive at a question that might seem simple but is actually quite profound. Where is your craving located? When you want something, where is that wanting? Is it in your head, a kind of mental noise? Is it in your chest, a tightness or ache? Is it in your stomach, a hollow or flutter? Does it have a shape, a color, a temperature? Most people have never asked themselves this. They experience craving as a kind of mental weather that just happens to them. But the Buddha insisted that craving has a specific location. It arises somewhere in your field of experience, and if you want to understand it, you have to find that spot. Let me tell you about a man named Marcus. Marcus was a recovering alcoholic, sober for 5 years when I met him. He'd done the work, gone to the meetings, built a new life. But something still troubled him. The craving for alcohol, the physical pull of it, had never completely disappeared. It had become quieter, more subtle, but it was still there. One day, during a meditation session, I asked him to do something he'd never done before. I asked him to locate the craving. Not to think about it, not to analyze it, but to feel directly where it lived in his body. He sat quietly for a long time. Then his eyes opened, and he looked at me with something like wonder. "It's in my chest," he said. "Right here." He placed his hand on his sternum. "It feels like a knot. A tight, hot knot. I've been feeling it for years and never even noticed." "What else?" I asked. He closed his eyes again. "There's a thought that goes with it. A voice that says, this will never end. You'll never be free of this. And underneath that, there's a feeling of hopelessness. Like I'm fighting a battle I can't win." "And the alcohol?" I asked. "Where does that fit in?" A long pause. "The alcohol was never the problem," he said slowly. "The problem was this knot. This hopelessness. The alcohol was just what I used to make it go away. For a little while." This is what the Buddha meant when he said that craving is located somewhere. Marcus had spent 5 years fighting the craving for alcohol, never realizing that the alcohol was just the messenger. The real craving, the one that mattered, was located in his chest. It was a sensation, a feeling, a knot of tension that had been there for so long he'd stopped noticing it. Think about advertisements for a moment. What are they actually selling? Not the product. The feeling they hope you'll associate with the product. A car isn't just a car, it's freedom, success, adventure. A watch isn't just a watch, it's sophistication, status, belonging. A vacation isn't just a vacation, it's escape, renewal, the life you wish you were living. The advertisers understand something that most of us don't. They understand that craving is never about the object. It's about the location, the place in your mind or body where a particular feeling lives. The product is just the key to that location. Buy the product, and you get to visit the feeling for a while. Until it fades, and you need another product to take you back. I once knew a woman who collected shoes. Not because she needed shoes, she had hundreds. Not because she particularly loved shoes. She collected them because each pair represented a different version of herself. The shoes she'd wear to important meetings. The shoes for romantic dinners. The shoes for weekend adventures. Each pair was a key to a different room in the house of her imagination. But here's what she eventually discovered. She never actually went into those rooms. She bought the shoes, felt a brief flutter of possibility, and then put them in her closet. The fantasy was enough. The craving was satisfied not by using the shoes, but by imagining the self who would wear them. This is what the Buddha meant when he said that craving delights, now here, now there. It moves from location to location in the mind, always seeking a place to land. And where it lands, a world forms. A sense of self forms. A whole universe of experience comes into being. Let me give you a personal example. For years, I had a craving for a particular kind of chocolate. Not just any chocolate, a specific brand, a specific flavor, a specific texture. I thought I loved that chocolate. I thought it was the chocolate I wanted. Then one day, while eating it, I actually paid attention. Really paid attention. I noticed the taste, the texture, the sensation of sweetness on my tongue. And I realized something shocking. I didn't actually like the chocolate that much. It was fine, but it wasn't extraordinary. It wasn't worth the effort I put into acquiring it. So what was I actually craving? I sat with this question for a while, and gradually the answer emerged. I was craving the memory of the first time I'd tasted that chocolate, years ago, on a trip with someone I loved. The chocolate was just a portal to that memory. A way of visiting, for a brief moment, a time when I felt happy and connected and alive. The craving wasn't for chocolate. It was for a feeling that the chocolate had become associated with. A feeling that lived in a particular location, not in my mouth, but in my heart. This is the practice the Buddha offers. Not to judge your cravings or fight them, but to understand them. To locate them. To see through them to what's actually driving them. When you feel a craving arise, pause for just a moment. Don't act on it immediately. Don't judge it. Just ask, where is this in my body? What does it feel like? What thoughts accompany it? What story is my mind telling about why I need this thing? You don't need to answer these questions analytically. Just hold them in awareness. Let the craving reveal itself to you. And what you'll often find is that the craving starts to lose its power. It becomes less urgent, less compelling. Not because you fought it, but because you saw it clearly. And seeing clearly, as the Buddha said, is the beginning of freedom. Let me tell you about a man I'll call Richard. Richard was a successful architect, known for designing buildings that seemed to float, that captured light in unexpected ways, that made people feel something when they walked through them. He came to meditation not because his life was falling apart, but because something was missing. He couldn't name it, but he could feel it, a quiet emptiness beneath all his accomplishments. In one of our conversations, he described something that had happened years ago. He'd designed a building that won awards, that was written about in magazines, that made his reputation. On the night of the awards ceremony, surrounded by colleagues who admired him, clients who wanted to work with him, a wife who was proud of him, he'd stepped outside for air. Standing alone in the darkness, looking up at the stars, he'd been overcome with a feeling he couldn't name. Not sadness, exactly. Not disappointment. Something else. A sense that all of this, the awards, the reputation, the success, was happening to someone else. That the person they were celebrating wasn't really him. I felt like a fraud, he told me. Not because I hadn't done the work, I had. But because the person they were celebrating, the person I'd become, felt like a character I was playing. And underneath that character, there was someone else entirely. Someone I'd lost touch with years ago. Richard had stumbled onto something profound. He discovered that the self we present to the world, the self we build through achievement and recognition, is not the whole story. There's something else underneath. Something that doesn't need awards or recognition. Something that simply is. The Buddha called this the process of becoming. It's the way we construct a sense of self around our desires. You want something, and suddenly there's a world in which that something matters, and a version of you who wants it. The world and the self arise together, like two sides of the same coin. Want a promotion? A world forms, the world of office politics, of qualifications and competition, of success and failure. And in that world, you become a striver, an achiever, someone with something to prove. The world and the self are inseparable. Want a relationship? A world forms, the world of dating, of compatibility and chemistry, of hope and heartbreak. And in that world, you become a seeker, a romantic, someone looking for love. The world and the self arise together. This happens hundreds of times a day. Each craving births a tiny world, a tiny self. And we move through these worlds like dreamers, never realizing we're the ones dreaming. Let me share another story. This one is about a woman named Elena, a mother of 3 who'd spent 20 years raising children, managing a household, supporting her husband's career. When her youngest left for college, she found herself adrift. For 2 decades, her identity had been wrapped up in being a mother. Now that role was fading, and she didn't know who she was anymore. She came to meditation hoping to find herself. Instead, she found something more surprising. She found that the self she'd been looking for didn't exist, at least not in the way she'd imagined. I'd been searching for the real Elena, she told me. The one underneath all the roles. But when I sat quietly and looked, there was no solid Elena to find. There were memories, feelings, thoughts, sensations. There was awareness itself. But no fixed self. No permanent Elena. And instead of being scared by this, I felt relieved. Liberated. All those years of trying to be a good mother, a good wife, a good person, they were exhausting because I was trying to maintain something that wasn't even real. Elena had discovered what the Buddha called not self, the truth that what we call self is actually a process, not a thing. It's a constant flowing, a continuous construction, a series of moments strung together like beads on a thread. There's no solid core, no permanent essence. Just this moment, and this moment, and this moment. This might sound frightening, but it's actually freeing. If the self is a process, it can be changed. If it's constructed, it can be constructed differently. If it's not solid, we don't have to defend it so fiercely. Think of it this way. Imagine you've been carrying a heavy suitcase for years, convinced it contains everything you are. Your identity, your worth, your history. You guard it carefully, never letting it out of your sight. Then one day, you open it and discover it's empty. The suitcase was always empty. You've been guarding nothing all these years. At first, this might feel like a loss. But then you realize something extraordinary. If the suitcase is empty, you don't have to carry it anymore. You can set it down. You can walk freely, unencumbered. You can be whoever you are in each moment, without the weight of a fixed identity. This is what the practice offers. Not the destruction of self, but the freedom from being confined by it. Not the end of identity, but the end of being trapped by any single identity. The breath practice helps with this. As you sit, watching the breath, you begin to see that everything you call self is just more stuff arising and passing away. Thoughts arise and pass. Feelings arise and pass. Sensations arise and pass. Even the sense of I arises and passes, moment by moment. And behind it all, there's awareness. Steady. Unchanging. Not caught up in any of it. Watching it all with equanimity. This awareness is not a self. It's not a thing at all. It's the space in which all selves appear and disappear. And resting in this awareness, even for a moment, is the greatest freedom there is. There's a teaching in the Buddhist tradition about two arrows. The first arrow is the inevitable pain of life, illness, aging, loss, disappointment. Everyone gets hit by the first arrow. It's part of being human. The second arrow is what we add on top. The story we tell ourselves about the pain. The resistance to it. The wishing it were different. The fear that it will never end. The anger at whoever caused it. The second arrow is entirely optional. But most of us shoot ourselves with it repeatedly, sometimes for years after the first arrow has landed. Let me tell you about a woman named Sophia. Sophia was a violinist, classically trained, who had played in orchestras around the world. Music was her life, her passion, her identity. Then one day, she developed a condition in her hands that made it impossible to play. The first arrow was the loss of her ability to make music. But the second arrow was far more devastating. For years after she stopped playing, she tortured herself with thoughts. She told herself she was worthless without her music. She compared herself to other violinists who were still performing. She replayed memories of concerts, grieving what she'd lost. She imagined a future that felt empty and meaningless. By the time she came to see me, the second arrow had done far more damage than the first. The physical condition had stabilized, she could use her hands for everyday tasks, just not for playing. But the mental suffering had grown worse and worse. I don't know who I am anymore, she said. For 40 years, I was a violinist. That was my identity. Without it, I'm nothing. I asked her to try something. I asked her to sit quietly and feel the grief in her body. Not to think about it, not to tell the story of it, just to feel it as a physical sensation. She closed her eyes. After a few moments, tears streamed down her face. "It's here," she whispered, touching her chest. A heaviness. A pressure. Like something is sitting on me. "And if you just let it be there," I said, without adding any thoughts to it, "what happens?" She sat with it for a long time. The tears continued, but something shifted in her face. "It's still there," she said finally. "But it's lighter. Like I'm not adding to it anymore. Like I'm just letting it be what it is." This is the difference between the first arrow and the second. The first arrow is the raw experience, the grief, the loss, the physical sensation. The second arrow is everything we add, the stories, the judgments, the resistance, the fear. When we can feel the first arrow without shooting the second, the pain becomes bearable. Sometimes it even becomes a kind of teacher. Think about a time someone hurt your feelings. The first arrow was what they said or did. That hurt. That was real. But then the second arrow arrived. The hours you spent replaying the conversation, imagining what you should have said, rehearsing arguments that never happened, building a case against them in your mind. That second arrow caused far more suffering than the first. Or think about a disappointment, a job you didn't get, a relationship that ended, a dream that didn't come true. The first arrow was the disappointment itself. The second arrow was all the ways you told yourself you weren't good enough, that you'd never succeed, that something was wrong with you. The practice of meditation teaches us to recognize the second arrow. To see it coming. To choose not to shoot. Let me share another story. This one is about a man named Thomas, a firefighter who had seen things no one should see. He'd pulled bodies from burning buildings, held dying children in his arms, witnessed the worst that life can offer. He came to meditation not because he was suffering from PTSD, he'd learned to manage that, but because he felt numb. Disconnected. Like he was watching his life from behind a glass wall. "I can handle the memories," he told me. "I've made peace with what I've seen. What I can't handle is the emptiness. The feeling that nothing matters anymore. That I'm just going through the motions." I asked him to describe the emptiness. Where was it in his body? What did it feel like? He closed his eyes. "It's everywhere," he said. "Like a deadness. An absence of feeling. Like I've used up all my capacity to care. And if you just let it be there," I said, without judging it, without trying to fix it, "what happens?" A long pause. "It's still there. But it's not as scary. It's just emptiness. Like an empty room. And I'm in the room, but I'm not the room. I'm the one noticing the room." This is the insight that meditation offers. You are not your pain. You are not your emptiness. You are not your grief. You are the one who notices these things. And that noticing awareness is untouched by anything it observes. The first arrow will come. That's guaranteed. Life will bring loss, disappointment, illness, aging. But the second arrow, the suffering we add, is optional. It's a choice. And once you see that it's a choice, you can start choosing differently. Not by suppressing the first arrow. Not by pretending it doesn't hurt. But by meeting it with awareness instead of adding stories. By letting it be what it is, without making it worse. This is the freedom the Buddha promised. Not a life without pain, but a life without unnecessary suffering. Not the end of difficulty, but the end of being destroyed by difficulty. And it begins with something as simple as noticing the breath. Because the breath is always now. Always neutral. Always available as an anchor when the arrows start flying. When the first arrow hits, come back to the breath. Feel the pain, but don't add to it. Watch the stories arise, but don't believe them. Let the second arrow fall to the ground, unused. This is the practice. This is the path. This is freedom. There's a story from the Buddhist tradition about a monk who lived alone in a small hut deep in the forest. He had almost nothing: a robe, a bowl, a mosquito net. People from the nearby village would bring him food each day, and he would spend his hours in meditation. One day, a thief came to the hut. The monk was sitting outside, watching the sunset. The thief went inside and began searching for something to steal. But the hut was empty. There was nothing to take. The thief came out, frustrated. "You have nothing," he shouted. The monk looked at him with compassion. "On the contrary," he said. "I have everything. I have this sunset. I have this forest. I have this moment. I have more than I could ever use. You're the one who has nothing, because you're looking for something that doesn't exist." The thief stood there, confused. No one had ever spoken to him like this. "If you want what I have," the monk continued, "you don't need to take anything. You just need to stop looking. Stop looking for something outside yourself. Stop looking for something to complete you. You're already complete. You just don't know it." The thief didn't understand. He walked away, shaking his head. But something had been planted. A seed. Years later, that thief became a monk himself, and he would tell this story to his own students. "The monk didn't give me anything," he would say. "He just showed me that I already had everything I needed. I just couldn't see it because I was too busy looking." This story points to something essential about craving. Craving is always looking. Always reaching. Always believing that satisfaction is somewhere else, something else, someone else. It's the mind's habit of perpetual dissatisfaction, of never being content with what is. And the opposite of craving is not having everything you want. The opposite of craving is stopping. Stopping the search. Stopping the reaching. Stopping the endless movement toward the next thing. And discovering, in that stopping, that everything you've been looking for was already here. Let me tell you about a woman named Yvonne. Yvonne was a collector. Not of anything in particular, she collected experiences. Concerts, festivals, exotic vacations, trendy restaurants, the latest wellness treatments. Her Instagram feed was a catalog of remarkable moments, and her friends often commented on how she seemed to be living the dream. But Yvonne was exhausted. Chasing the next remarkable experience had become a full-time job. She spent hours researching, planning, booking, documenting. And the moment one experience was over, she was already planning the next. There was no space between. No time to actually be present for any of it. "I don't know how to stop," she told me. "When I'm not doing something amazing, I feel like I'm wasting my life. Like I'm falling behind. Like everyone else is out there living and I'm just sitting here." I asked her to try something. I asked her to spend a whole day doing nothing remarkable. No plans, no events, no documentation. Just being at home, doing ordinary things. And to notice what came up. She agreed, reluctantly. The next week, she reported back. The first few hours were torture, she said. I was so restless I thought I'd climb the walls. I kept reaching for my phone, checking for something interesting, planning something to do. But I'd made a commitment, so I just sat with the restlessness. And then, around midday, something shifted. The restlessness settled. And I started noticing things I'd never noticed before. The way light comes through my window in the afternoon. The sound of birds outside. The feeling of just being here, without needing to be anywhere else. It was like coming home to a place I'd forgotten I had. Yvonne had discovered something profound. The restlessness wasn't a sign that she needed to do something. It was a sign that she needed to stop doing. The discomfort she felt when she wasn't chasing experiences wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a doorway to something deeper. This is what the monk understood that the thief didn't. The thief thought happiness was in having things. The monk knew it was in not needing things. The thief thought satisfaction was in acquiring. The monk knew it was in stopping. Think about your own life for a moment. When was the last time you felt truly content? Not excited, not thrilled, not entertained, just content. Peaceful. At ease. No reaching, no wanting, no sense that something is missing. For most of us, those moments are rare. And when they come, we often don't recognize them. We're so used to the motion of craving that stillness feels strange. Uncomfortable. Like something's wrong. But those moments of contentment are not the absence of something good. They're the presence of something essential. They're glimpses of our natural state, before craving obscures it. They're reminders that everything we're looking for is already here, hidden beneath the reaching. The practice of meditation is learning to recognize these moments. To cultivate them. To rest in them. To discover that they're not exceptions, they're our birthright. They're what's left when craving stops. And the remarkable thing is, the more you rest in contentment, the less you need to chase. The less you need to acquire. The less you need to become. Because you've already arrived. You're already home. You're already complete. Not because you've finally gotten everything you wanted, but because you've finally stopped wanting everything to be different. This is the freedom the Buddha promised. Not the fulfillment of every desire, but the end of being driven by desire. Not the acquisition of everything you want, but the discovery that you don't need to acquire anything to be whole. And it's available right now. In this moment. Beneath whatever craving is arising. Behind whatever restlessness is moving. There's a stillness that doesn't move. A contentment that doesn't depend on conditions. A peace that isn't disturbed by anything. You don't need to find it. You just need to stop looking long enough to notice it's already here. Let me tell you about a man named Walter. Walter was a retired school principal, in his 70s, who had spent his entire life serving others. He'd been a beloved educator, a devoted husband, a caring father. Now, in retirement, he found himself facing something he'd never expected, a profound sense of meaninglessness. I did everything right, he told me. I worked hard, I loved my family, I contributed to my community. And now I wake up every morning and think, what's the point? I'm not depressed. I've been depressed, and this is different. This is just emptiness. Like the story of my life is over, and I don't know what comes next. I asked him to describe this emptiness. Where was it in his body? What did it feel like? He closed his eyes. It's like a void, he said. Right here in my chest. A hollow space. And there's a thought that goes with it, a voice that says, "You're done. You're irrelevant now. No one needs you anymore." And if you just let that void be there, I said, without adding the thought, what happens? He sat with it for a long moment. It's still there. But it's not as frightening. It's just space. Empty space. And I'm noticing it, but I'm not it. I'm the one noticing the space. Walter had stumbled onto something profound. The emptiness he'd been fearing wasn't the end of meaning. It was the beginning of something else. It was the space in which new meaning could arise, unconstrained by the old stories. The Buddha talked about this. He said that all conditioned things, all the stories we tell ourselves, all the identities we construct, all the meanings we create, are impermanent. They arise, they last for a while, and they pass away. And when they pass away, what's left? Emptiness. But not the kind of emptiness that's nothing. The kind of emptiness that's everything. Because it's empty of fixed definitions, empty of limitations, empty of the need to be anything in particular. Think of it like this. Imagine you've lived your whole life in a house filled with furniture. Room after room of furniture, chairs, tables, cabinets, beds. You know every piece, every arrangement, every creak and groan. Then one day, someone comes and removes all the furniture. The house is empty. At first, this feels like loss. Where did everything go? What will I do without my furniture? But then you look around and notice something you'd never seen before. The house itself. The space. The light coming through the windows. The way sound echoes off the walls. You'd been so focused on the furniture that you'd never noticed the house that contained it. This is what happens when the stories we've built our lives around begin to fade. At first, it feels like loss. Like emptiness. Like meaninglessness. But if we can stay with that emptiness, without rushing to fill it with new furniture, we discover something extraordinary. We discover the space itself. The awareness that was always there, hidden behind the furniture of our identities. Walter eventually discovered this. After months of sitting with his emptiness, he reported something remarkable. The void is still there, he said. But it's not empty anymore. Or rather, it's empty in a different way. It's empty of the old stories, but it's full of possibility. I don't know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life, and that's okay. I don't need to know. I just need to be present for whatever arises. He started volunteering at a local school, reading to children. Not because he needed to be needed, but because he enjoyed it. He took up painting, something he'd always wanted to try but never had time for. He started having long conversations with his wife, conversations that went deeper than they'd ever gone before. The furniture was gone, but the house was more alive than ever. This is what the Buddha meant when he talked about liberation. Not the accumulation of more and better furniture, but the discovery that you are the house, not the furniture. That your true nature is not any of the stories you've told about yourself, but the awareness in which those stories appear and disappear. Let me share another story. This one is about a young woman named Keisha, a graduate student in philosophy who came to meditation because she was tormented by questions about meaning. She'd read all the existentialists, all the postmodernists, all the thinkers who deconstructed every possible foundation for meaning. And she'd concluded that life was absurd, that nothing really mattered, that we were all just pretending. I can't live like this, she told me. I can't get out of bed in the morning believing that nothing matters. But I can't find any argument that convinces me otherwise. I'm stuck. I asked her to put aside the arguments for a moment. To sit quietly and just feel what it was like to be alive. To notice the sensations in her body, the thoughts passing through her mind, the awareness that was noticing all of it. She did this for several minutes. When she opened her eyes, there were tears on her cheeks. It doesn't matter that nothing matters, she said softly. What matters is this moment. This breath. This being alive. The questions are just more thoughts. And underneath them, there's something that doesn't need answers. Something that's just grateful to be here. Keisha had discovered that meaning isn't something you find in arguments or philosophies. It's something you experience directly, in the raw fact of being alive. It doesn't need to be justified or explained. It just is. This is what the practice offers. Not answers to the big questions, but a way of living the questions themselves. Not a resolution to the problem of meaning, but a discovery that you are the meaning, the awareness in which all meanings arise and pass away. The emptiness you fear is not an absence. It's a presence. The most intimate presence there is. It's what's left when everything else falls away. And it's enough. Let me tell you about a woman named Diane. Diane was a nurse who worked in a busy urban hospital, in the emergency room, where she saw things most people couldn't imagine. Gunshot wounds, car accidents, cardiac arrests, children with fevers so high they seized. She came home every day carrying the weight of what she'd witnessed. She started meditating because she needed something to help her cope. For a while, it worked. The breathing exercises helped her calm down. The mindfulness practices helped her stay present instead of replaying traumatic scenes. But after a few months, something shifted. The practices stopped working. She'd sit down to meditate and find herself flooded with emotion, grief, anger, despair. She'd try to focus on her breath, but the feelings were too strong. She came to see me, frustrated. I thought meditation was supposed to help, she said. Now I feel worse. What am I doing wrong? I told her something that surprised her. You're not doing anything wrong. You're doing something right. The meditation isn't creating these feelings, it's revealing them. They've been there all along, buried beneath your coping mechanisms. Now they're surfacing so you can finally release them. This is an important point. Meditation is not about feeling better. It's about feeling more. More fully, more directly, more honestly. It's about opening to whatever is present, even when it's painful. The Buddha called this the noble truth of suffering. Not because he was pessimistic, but because he was realistic. Life contains pain, physical pain, emotional pain, the pain of loss. This pain is not a mistake. It's part of being human. The problem isn't the pain. The problem is our relationship to it. We resist it, fight it, try to escape it. And that resistance creates a second layer of suffering on top of the first. The pain plus the struggle against pain equals suffering. Diane had spent years resisting the pain of her work. She'd developed coping mechanisms that allowed her to function. But the pain was still there, buried alive. And when she sat down in meditation, with nowhere to go, the buried pain finally surfaced. I suggested she try a different approach. Instead of trying to focus on her breath when feelings arose, I asked her to focus on the feelings themselves. To let them be there. To investigate them with curiosity rather than fear. Next time you sit, I said, and the grief or anger comes, just say to yourself, "Oh, here you are. I've been wondering where you've been." Then get curious. Where is this feeling in my body? What does it feel like? Does it change over time? She tried this for a week and came back transformed. It's still painful, she said. The feelings haven't gone away. But something shifted. I'm not fighting them anymore. I'm just letting them be there. And somehow, that makes them bearable. Sometimes they even dissolve on their own, just from being seen. This is the power of clear seeing. When you stop fighting your experience, it can finally release you. When you stop resisting pain, it can flow through you instead of getting stuck. When you stop running from your feelings, you discover that you can survive them. That they pass, like everything else. Let me share another story. This one is about a man named Frank, a veteran who'd served in combat. He'd been diagnosed with PTSD, had done years of therapy, had tried every treatment available. But the nightmares continued, the flashbacks still came without warning. When he came to meditation, he was skeptical. But he was desperate enough to try anything. I asked him about his experience of the flashbacks. What were they like? It's like I'm back there, he said. The sights, the sounds, the smells. My heart races, I can't breathe, I'm drenched in sweat. It's not a memory. It's a reliving. And I can't make it stop. I asked him to try something. The next time a flashback came, instead of trying to make it stop, simply observe it. Notice it as a phenomenon arising in awareness. Track the sensations in his body without getting lost in the story. It took months of practice. The flashbacks were powerful. But gradually, Frank developed the ability to step back, even slightly, from the experience. To notice the fear without becoming the fear. One day, he told me something remarkable. The flashbacks still come, he said. But they're different now. It's like watching a movie instead of being in the movie. I still feel the fear, but there's a part of me that knows I'm safe, here in this room. And that part is growing. Frank had discovered what the Buddha called the third noble truth, the truth of cessation. Not the end of all experience, but the end of suffering in relation to experience. Not the elimination of pain, but the discovery that pain doesn't have to become suffering. This is the promise of the practice. Not a life without pain, but a life without the second arrow. Not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of a peace that can hold any difficulty without being shaken. And it begins with something simple. Sitting still and letting whatever arises be there. No fighting. No fleeing. Just being present, breath by breath, discovering that you are larger than anything that arises within you. Let me end with a story about a woman named Grace. Grace was in her 80s, living in a hospice, days away from death. I sat beside her bed. She was weak, but her eyes were clear. "You know what's strange," she said. "I spent my whole life wanting things. Wanting to be loved. Wanting to be successful. Wanting to be happy. And now, at the very end, I realized that what I was really wanting was this." "This?" I asked. "This moment. This peace. This acceptance. I was always looking for it somewhere else. But it was always here. Inside me. Waiting for me to stop looking long enough to notice." She smiled. "All that wanting, and the whole time, what I wanted was already here. I just couldn't see it because I was so busy wanting." Grace died 2 days later. Peacefully. Her words have stayed with me. What you're craving isn't what you think you're craving. Underneath every desire is a simple wish for peace. For wholeness. For the end of wanting. And that peace isn't somewhere else. It's here. Now. Beneath the wanting. Behind the seeking. The Buddha spent 45 years teaching this one truth. Not because it's complicated, but because we're so good at forgetting it. So here's a practice. The next time a craving arises, pause. Don't act. Don't judge. Just ask. What am I really wanting? Can I find that right now, without the thing I'm reaching for? You might discover that what you're really wanting is already present. A sense of peace. A moment of rest. And in that discovery, the craving loses its power. This is the end of seeking. Not finding the perfect thing, but realizing you were never lacking. Not achieving all your goals, but discovering you are complete exactly as you are. Grace knew this at the end. You don't have to wait that long. You can know it now. In this moment. Beneath whatever is arising, there's a peace that doesn't depend on anything. A wholeness that was never broken. A home that was never lost. Welcome home.